Hello, everybody. It is 2 p.m. on a Tuesday morning, and we are ready for our read aloud. First thing that I kind of want to just say is that we probably all heard the news that yesterday Governor Inslee decided that we were going to no longer be attending school for the rest of the school year. And I am heartbroken from that, like nobody else. I would love to have seen you all one more time. If I'd known that was the last day, I probably would have been a little bit more nostalgic. But here's the deal. We're still learners. You are still my students. You are still the people that I cherish, and I want to make sure that you're still learning. And we're going to make the best of this situation. We're going to approach everything with that growth mindset. We're going to say that this is something brand new. All right. You are at the forefront of something brand new that you are going to tell generations to come about this. All right. And you and me, we're going to keep going. We're going to keep learning. We're going to keep being. And in the meantime, we're going to keep sharing those stories because stories are what are going to help ground us, help us remember that either we're not alone or, hey, this is how one person got through it, so we're going to get through it just like they did. So one of the things that I'm going to do is I'm going to read from one of my favorite authors. His name is Neil Gaiman, and if you haven't heard of him, I'm so sorry, but don't worry, you can catch up. We're social distancing. So you'll have that opportunity to check out Neil Gaiman's works. One of the things that I love about Neil Gaiman is he's able to take the most simple stories, the most simple descriptions, and he's able to make them feel magical. All right. He's done this with a lot of short stories. Some of my favorite short stories of his are just about, like, for example, one that I really like is an old lady and she's just living her life in the way that old ladies would. And so we think that, oh, it's really boring, but the way that he tells it, the use of descriptive language that he uses, all of those things just kind of come together and make something just make it feel like it's extraordinary, make it feel like it's extra magical. I'm actually giving you a little extra magic today, and we are reading from his book, Norse Mythology. I love this book because I love mythology. I love the stories that come with that were used by ancient peoples in ancient times, trying to explain the ways of the world. All right. And that's what mythology is. It's before we had the science or the explanation or those reasoning skills that we have today. And it's humans trying to make sense of the world. Just like you and me, we're trying to make sense of the world right now that we live in. So with that, we're going to read how Thor actually got his hammer. All right. So Neil Gaiman in Norse mythology. Oh no, I'm paused on. Okay, now I'm back. All right. The treasures of the gods. Thor's wife was the beautiful Sif. She was of the Aesir. Thor loved her for herself and for her blue eyes and her pale skin, her red lips and her smile, and he loved her long, long hair, the color of a field of barley at the end of summer. Thor woke and stared at sleeping Sif. He scratched his beard, then tapped his wife on her with a huge hand. "What happened to you?" he asked. She opened her eyes, the color of a summer sky. "What are you talking about?" she asked, and then she moved her head and looked puzzled. Her fingers reached up to the bare pink scalp and touched it, exploring tentatively. Then she looked at Thor, horrified. "My hair," she said, was all she said. Thor nodded. "It's gone," he said. "He has left you bald." "He?" asked Sif. Thor said nothing. He strapped on his belt of power, Menningjord, and which doubled his enormous strength. "Loki," he said. "Loki has done this." "Why do you think that?" asked Sif, touching her bald head frantically, as a fluttering touch of her fingers would make her hair return. "Because," said Thor, "when something goes wrong, the first thing I always think is, it is Loki's fault. It saves me a lot of time." Thor found Loki's door locked, so he pushed through it, leaving it in pieces. He picked up Loki picked Loki up and said only, "Why?" "Why what?" Loki's face was the picture of perfect innocence. "Sif's hair. My wife's golden hair. It was so beautiful. Why did you cut it off?" 100 expressions chased each other across Loki's face. Cunning and shiftiness, truculence and confusion. Thor shook Loki hard. Loki looked down and did his best to appear ashamed. It was funny. Thor's brow lowered. Sif's hair was her glory. People think that her head was shaved for punishment, and that she did something she should not have done, and did it with someone that she should not have. "Well, yes, there is that," said Loki. "There will probably think that. Unfortunately, given that I took her hair from the roots, she will go like that for the rest of her life, completely bald." "No, she won't." Thor looked up at Loki, whom he was now holding far above his head, with a face like thunder. "I'm afraid she will, but there's always hats and scarves." "She won't go through life bald," said Thor, "because, Loki Laufey's son, if you do not put her hair back right now, I am going to break every single bone in your body, each and every one of them. And if her hair does not grow properly, I will come back and break each and every bone in your body again and again. I will do it every day, and I'll soon get really good at it." He carried on, sounding slightly more cheerful. "No," said Loki, "I can't put her hair back. It doesn't work like that." "Today," mused Thor, "it will probably take me an hour to break every bone in your body. But I bet with practice I could get it down to about 15 minutes. It will be interesting to find out." He stared to break his first bone. "Dwarves!" shrieked Loki. "Pardon?" "Dwarves. They can make anything. They make golden hair for Sif. Hair that would bond to her scalp and grow normally. Perfect golden hair. They could do it. I swear they could." "Then," said Thor, "you had better go talk to them." And he dropped Loki from high above his head onto the floor. Loki clambered to his feet and hurried away before Thor could break any more of his bones. He put on his shoes and let him travel through the sky. He went to Svartalheim, where the dwarves had their workshops. The most ingenious craftsmen of them all, he decided, were the 3 dwarves known as the Sons of Ivaldi. Loki went to their underground forge. "Hello, Sons of Ivaldi. I have asked around, and people tell me here that Brock and Edfrey, his brother, are the greatest dwarf craftsmen that there have ever been," said Loki. "No," said one of the Sons of Ivaldi. "It's us. We are the greatest craftsmen there are. I am assured that Brock and Etri can make treasures as good as those you can." "Lies," said the tallest of the Sons of Ivaldi. "I wouldn't trust those fumble-fingered incompetents with a shoe of a horse." The smallest and wisest of the Sons of Ivaldi simply shrugged. "Whatever they make, we could do better." "I hear that they've challenged you," said Loki. 3 treasures. The gods of Aesir would judge who makes the best treasure. Oh, and, by the way, one of the treasures you make needs to be hair. Ever-growing, perfect golden hair. "We can do that," said one of the Sons of Ivaldi. Even Loki could barely tell them apart. Loki went across the mountain to see the dwarf called Brock, and at the workshop he shared with his brother, Eitri. "Ivaldi's sons are making 3 treasures as gifts for the gods of Asgard," said Loki. "The gods are going to judge the treasures. Ivaldi's sons want me to tell you that they are certain that you and your brother, Eitri, cannot make anything as good as they can. They called you fumble-fingered incompetence." Brock was no fool. "This smells extremely fishy to me, Loki. Are you sure this isn't your doing? Stirring up trouble between Etri and me and the Ivaldi's boys seemed like the sort of thing you'd do." Loki looked at as guileless as he could, which was amazingly guileless. "Nothing to do with me," he said innocently. "I just thought you ought to know." "And you have no personal stake in this?" asked Brock. "None whatsoever." Brock nodded and looked up at Loki. Brock's brother, Eitri, was a great craftsman, but Brock was the smarter of the 2, and the more determined. "Well,
Then we'll be happy to take on the sons of Vivaldi in a test of skill, to be judged by the gods. But because I have no doubt that Etri can forge a better and craftier things than Vivaldi's lot. But let's make this personal, Loki, eh? What do you have in mind? Asked Loki. Your head, said Brock. If we win this contest, we get your head, Loki. There's lots of things going on in that head of yours, and I have no doubt that Etri could make a wonderful device out of it. A thinking machine, perhaps. Or an inkwell. Loki kept smiling, but he scowled on the inside. The day had started out so well. Still, he simply had to ensure that Etri and Brock lost the contest. And the gods would still get 6 wonderful things from the dwarves, and Sif would get her golden hair. He could do that. He was Loki. Of course, he said. My head, no problem. Across the mountain, the sons of Vivaldi were making their treasures. Loki was not worried about them, but he needed to make sure that Brock and Etri could not possibly win. Brock and Etri entered the forge, and there was dark in there, lit by the orange glow of burning charcoal. Etri took on a pigskin from a shelf and placed it in the forge. I've been keeping this pigskin for something like this, he said. Brock just nodded. Right, said Etri. You work the bellows, Brock. Just keep pumping them. I need this hot. I need it consistently hot, or it won't work. Pump, pump. Brock began to pump the bellows, sending steam of oxygen-rich air into the heart of the forge, heating everything up, done so many times as he had before. Etri watched until he was satisfied that he would be all to his liking. Etri looked into the work of his creation outside the forge. He opened the door to go out, and the large black insect flew in. It was not a horsefly. It was not a deerfly. It was bigger than either. It flew in and circled the room in a miraculous way. Brock could hear the sound of Etri's hammers outside the forge, and sounds of filing and twisting and shaping and banging. That's the way that most swords are going to be made. They take something that's really hot, but they need consistent airflow in order to make it as hot as possible. So that's the challenge here, is that somebody is pumping something really, really heavy. That's what Brock is doing. And Etri is making sure that it's going to be a consistent heat. All right. The large black fly, it was the biggest, blackest fly you had ever seen. And it landed on the back of Brock's head while he's pumping. Both of Brock's hands were on the bellows, and he did not stop pumping to swat at the fly. The fly bit Brock hard on the back of the hand. Brock kept pumping. The door opened, and Etri came in carefully and pulled the work from the forge. It appeared to be a huge boar with bristles of gleaming gold. Good work, said Etri. A fraction of a degree warmer or cooler, and the whole thing could have been a waste of our time. Good work to you, too, said Brock. The black fly on the corner of the ceiling seethed with resentment and irritation. I don't think that's just any old regular fly. Etri took a block of gold and placed it on the forge. Right. This one will impress them. When I call, I start pumping the bellows. Whatever happens, do not slow down, speed up, or stop. There's fiddly work involved. Got it, said Brock. Etri looked at the room and began to work. Brock waited until he heard Etri's call, and then started to pump the bellows. The black fly circled across the room thoughtfully, and then landed on Brock's neck. The insect stepped aside daintily to avoid the rivulet of sweat, for the air was hot and close to the forge. It bit Brock's neck as hard as it could. Scarlet blood joined on the sweat on Brock's neck, but the dwarf did not stop pumping. Etri returned. He removed his white-hot arm ring from the forge. He dropped it to the stone cooling pool to quench it. The cloud of steam arm ring fell out from the water. The ring cooled, rapidly moving to orange, to red-hot, and then it cooled to gold. It's called Draupnir, said Etri. The Dripper. I thought that was a funny name for a ring. Not this one, said Etri. He explained to Brock what was ever so special about this arm ring. Now, said Etri, there's something I've had in mind to make for a long time now, my masterwork, but it's trickier than the other two. So what you have to do is pump and don't stop pumping? Asked Brock. That's right. Even more than before. Do not change your pace, the whole thing will be ruined. Etri packed up an ingot of pig iron, bigger than any ingot that the black fly, who was Loki, had ever seen before. He hefted it into the forge. He left the room and called out to Brock to begin pumping. Brock began to pump, and the sound of Etri's hammers began as Etri pulled and shaped and welded and joined. Loki, in fly shape, decided that there was no more time for subtlety. Etri's masterpiece would be something that would impress the gods, and the gods were impressed enough, he would lose his head. Loki landed between Brock's eyes and started to bite the dwarf's eyelids. The dwarf continued to pump, his eyes stinging. Loki bit deeper, harder, more desperately. Now blood ran from the dwarf's eyelids into the eyes of down his face, blinding him. Brock squinted and shook his head, trying to dislodge the fly. He jerked his head from side to side. He contorted his mouth, trying to blow air up at the fly, but it was no good. The fly continued to bite, and as the dwarf could see nothing but blood, a sharp pain filled his head. Brock counted, and at the bottom of the downstroke, he whipped one hand from the bellows and swiped the fly away, with such speed and such strength that Loki barely escaped with his life. Brock grabbed the bellows once again and continued to pump. Enough! Called Etri. The black fly flew unsteadily about the room. Etri opened the door, allowing the fly to escape. Etri looked at his brother with disappointment. Brock's face was a mess of blood and sweat. I don't know what you were playing at the time, said Etri, but you came close to ruining everything. The temperature was all over the place at the end. As it is, it's nowhere near as impressive as I'd hoped. But we'll have to see. Loki, in Loki's shape, strolled through the open door. So, all ready for the contest? He asked. Brock can go to Asgard and present my gifts to the gods and cut off your head, said Etri. I like it here at my forge, making things. Brock stared at Loki with swollen eyelids. I'm looking forward to cutting off your head, said Brock. It got personal. In Asgard, 3 gods sat on their thrones. One-eyed Odin, the All-Father, red-bearded Thor of all thunders, and handsome Frey of the summer's harvest. They would be the judges. Loki looked before them, beside the 3 almost identical sons of Vivaldi. Brock, black-bearded and brooding, was there alone, standing to one side, with the things that he had brought hidden beneath sheets. So, said Odin, what are we judging? Treasures, said Loki. The sons of Vivaldi have made gifts for you, great Odin, and for Thor, and for Frey, and so have Etri and Brock. It is up to you to decide which of the 6 things is the finest treasure. I myself will show you the gifts made by the sons of Vivaldi. He presented Odin with a spear called Gungnir. It was a beautiful spear, carved with intricate runes. It will penetrate anything when you throw it, and it will always find its mark, said Loki. Odin had but one eye, after all, and sometimes his aim could be less than perfect. And, just as important, an oath taken on his spear is unbreakable. Odin hefted the spear. This is very fine, was all he said. And here, Loki said proudly, is a flowing head of golden hair, made of real gold. I will attach itself to the head of the person who needs it, and it will grow and behave every way as it could as if it were real hair. 100,000 strands of gold. I will test it, said Thor. Sif, come here. Sif rose and came to the front, her head covered. She removed her headscarves, and the gods gasped when they saw Sif's naked head, bald and pink. Then she carefully placed the dwarf's golden wig on her head and shook the hair. They watched as the base of the wig joined itself to her scalp, and since Sif stood in front of them, even more radiant and beautiful than before. Impressive, said Thor. Good job. Sif tossed her golden hair and walked out the hall into the sunlight to show her new hair to her friends. The last of the sons of Ivaldi remarkable gifts were small, folded like cloth, and this cloth Loki placed in front of Frey. "What is it? It looks like a silk scarf," said Frey, unimpressed. "It does," said Loki, "but when you unfold it, it will discover it's a ship called Skinbaldur. It will always have a fair wind wherever it goes. Although it is huge, the biggest ship you can imagine, it will fold up, as you see, like a cloth, and you can always put it into your pouch." Frey was impressed, and Loki was relieved. They were 3 excellent gifts. Now it was Brock's turn. His eyelids were red and swollen, and there was a huge insect bite on the side of his neck. Loki thought Brock looked entirely too cocky, especially given the remarkable things Ivaldi's sons had made. Brock took on the golden arm ring and placed it in front of Odin on his high throne. "The arm ring is called Dropnir," said Brock, "because every ninth night, 8 gold arm rings of equal beauty will drip from it, and you can reward people with them, or store them, and your wealth will increase." Odin examined the arm ring, and then pushed it into his arm, high onto his bicep. It gleamed there. "It is very fine," he said. Loki recalled that Odin had said the same thing about the spear. Brock walked over to Frey, raised a cloth, and revealed a huge boar with bristles made of gold. "This is a boar my brother made for you, to pull your chariot," said Brock. "It will race across the sky and over the sea faster than the fastest horse. There will never be a dark so night that golden bristles will not give light and let you see where you are going. It will never tire, and it will never fail you. It is called Gulenbrusti, the golden bristled one." Frey looked impressed. Still, Loki thought, the magical ship that had folded up like a cloth was every bit as impressive as an unstoppable boar that shone in the dark. Loki's head was quite safe. The last gift Brock had to present was the one that Loki knew he had already managed to sabotage. From beneath the cloth, Brock produced a hammer and placed it to Thor. Thor looked at it and sniffed. "The handle is rather short," he said. Brock nodded. "Yes," he said. "That's my fault. I was working on the bellows. But before you dismiss it, let me tell you about this what makes this hammer unique. It's called Mjolnir. It's the lightning maker. First of all, it's unbreakable. Doesn't matter how hard you hit something with it, the hammer will always be undamaged." Thor looked interested. He had already broken a great number of weapons over the years, normally by hitting things with them. "If you throw the hammer, it will never miss what you throw it at." Thor looked even more interested. He had lost a number of otherwise excellent weapons by throwing them at things, and that irritated him and missing. And he watched too many weapons he had thrown disappear into the distance, never to be seen again. "No matter how hard or how far you throw it, it will always return to your hand." Thor was actually smiling, and the thunder god did not often smile. "You can change the size of the hammer. It will grow and shrink down so small that if you wish, you can hide it inside of your shirt." Thor clapped his hands together in delight, and thunder echoed across Asgard. "And yet, as you have observed," concluded Brock, "the handle of the hammer is indeed too short, and that is my fault. I failed to keep the bellows while my brother Etri was forging it." "The shortness of the handle is a minor cosmetic problem," said Thor. "This hammer will protect us from frost giants, and this is the finest gift I have ever seen. It will protect Asgard. It will protect all of us," Odin said with approval. "If I were a giant, I would be very afraid of Thor if he had that hammer," said Frey. "Yes, an excellent hammer. But Thor, what about the hair? Sif's beautiful golden hair," said Loki slightly desperately. "What? Oh, yes, my wife has very nice hair," said Thor. "Now, show me how to make the hammer grow and shrink, Brock." "Thor's hammer is better than even my wonderful spear and my excellent arm ring," Odin said, nodding. The hammer is greater and more impressive than my ship and my boar, admitted Frey. It will keep the gods of Asgard safe. The gods clapped Brock on the back and told him that he and Etri had made the finest gift that had ever been given. Good to know, said Brock. And he turned to Loki. So, said Brock, I get to cut off your head, Laufey's son, and take it back with me. Etri will be so pleased. We can turn it into something useful. I will ransom my head, said Loki. I have treasures I can give you. Etri and I have all the treasures we need, said Brock. We make treasures. No, Loki, I want your head. Loki thought for a moment and then said, Then you can have it, if you can catch me. And Loki leapt high into the air and ran off, far above their heads. In the moment, he was gone. Brock looked at Thor. Can you catch him? Thor shrugged. I really shouldn't, he said. But then, I would very much like to try out the hammer. In moments, Thor returned, holding Loki tightly. Loki was glaring with impotent fury. The dwarf Brock took out his knife. Come here, Loki, he said. I'm going to cut off your head. Of course, said Loki. Of course you can cut off my head. But, and I appeal to the almighty Odin here, if you cut off my neck, you are violating the terms of our agreement, which you promised my head, and my head only. Odin inclined to his head. Loki is right. You have no right to cut his neck. Brock was irritated. But I can't cut off his head without cutting his neck. Loki looked pleased with himself. You see, he said, if people thought they were thought through the exactness of their words, they would not take on Loki, the wisest, the cleverest, the trixiest, the most intelligent, the best looking. Brock whispered a suggestion to Odin. That would be fair. Brock produced a strip of leather and a knife. He was wrapping the leather around Loki's mouth. Brock tied a piece of leather of the tip of the knife blade. It's not working. My knife isn't cutting you. I might have made wisely arranged for the protection of knife blades, said Loki modestly, just in case the whole you can't cut my neck ploy didn't work. I'm afraid no knife blade can cut me. Brock grunted and produced an awl, a pointed spike used in leatherwork. He jabbed through the leather, punching holes through Loki's lips, and then he took a strong thread and sewed Loki's lips together through it. Brock walked away, leaving Loki with his mouth sewn tight, unable to complain. For Loki, the pain of being unable to talk hurt even more than the pain of having his lips stitched together with leather. So now you know. That is how the gods got their greatest treasures. It was Loki's fault. Even Thor's hammer was Loki's fault. That was the thing about Loki. You resented him even when you were at your most grateful. And you were grateful to him even when you hated him the most. And that is how the story of how Thor got his hammer. Definitely very interesting. I love a lot of the stories that he comes up with. Again, the way that he explains, he emotes things. It's definitely just a feel-good story. So if you are looking for those feel-good stories, he's had a couple movies made. I don't recommend Coraline, unless if you like scary stories, but Stardust is my favorite of his. It's also made a movie, which is very sweet and very well done. But if you are looking for feel-good stories that are actually still pretty well written, Neil Gaiman is the way to go. All right. I hope you all are having a great day. I hope you all are having a wonderful time adjusting to our new normal, adjusting to the fact that you are going to be the pioneers of a brand new school style. All right. We'll be with you every step of the way. And until Thursday, because we don't have read alouds on Wednesdays, we will see you soon. All right. Take care.